And just like that, we are back in here in Diablo 4. And with this video, we're going to be going over my Frozen Orb build that I have been using here in Endgame World Tier 4 areas. I just hit level 100. I've been using this since like level 75 or so. I did a firewall setup just for speed leveling all the way from 1 to about 70 is where I'd probably start trying to swap off of that into this. Basically, once you hit World Tier 4 and you start getting your Ancestral gear, so that like 65-70 range, I would definitely start trying to swap over to this build. Basically, once you can go farm Zir is going to where you're going to want to swap over to this build. You don't need the new amulet, so that's what we are going to be using in this build, is the Fractured Winter Glass. Now, this thing is fantastic. It makes this build tons better, but you can still get away with Frozen Orb without this. I did use this build without that amulet for a little bit, maybe like 5-10 levels, so you can get this started even without that amulet, but go farm Zir as quick as you can, so farm up on that blood. But everything else with this build has been feeling really good. I'm clearing pits in like the mid 50s right now. I could probably push it up to like 60. I still have a ton of upgrading to do. I've not found any of the exalted gear, or whatever they're calling it in this game, with the enhanced stats on my weapons. I still don't have any of those. There's a lot of upgrades that I could still get right now, and a lot of farming I can do, but with the gold costs right now, in terms of masterworking, it takes forever to level up this gear. So right now, I'm kind of stuck around that like 55-60 range. The bossing is just what really slows down the pit process. The mobbing still feels incredibly fast in that 55 to 60. It's basically just that bossing where Frozen Orb starts to take its hit. But otherwise, this build has been feeling really good if you're doing just like Hell Tides, Nightmare Dungeons, anything like that, or just like low pits. You're probably not going to need the high pits anyways in terms of the gold costs until they lower that. So this build's going to be working perfectly fine for you. So we're going to be going over everything with it, the skills, Paragon board, all of our gear, and all of the different modifications that I've done to the gear. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. As always, I do like to start off with our skills and skill tree when we're looking at our build. So really quick going through the skills, there's nothing really that crazy new here. It's the same old setup that we've been using forever here on Sorcerer. Flame Shield, Teleport, Frost Nova, Ice Armor, Ice Blades, and then Frozen Orb. For our enchantments, we're going to be running Firebolt, and then also Frozen Orb. Firebolt, so we can get Devouring Blaze and all the DRs from burning, everything to just make everything burn. That's why we are going to be using Firebolt. And then for Frozen Orb, it's going to allow us to send out a ton of extra Frozen Orbs and allow us to deal a lot more damage, freeze things quicker, and just overall it's our main source of damage, so why not have more of them? Then in terms of the skill tree, just make sure you have 1 point in a Firebolt. Does not matter where you put the second point, just to move down. Max out our Frozen Orb, and then we're going to be grabbing Greater Frozen Orb so we can make enemies vulnerable. That way everything we're attacking is vulnerable. You get the DR from vulnerable if any of your gear has vulnerable damage passives. It's just always going to be active, so that's why I do really like that. Also, you can't freeze a boss, and that's where we're going to be needing to get mana from. So it doesn't really matter with the Destructive Frozen Orb. Otherwise, grabbing Elemental Dominance for the 12%, we should be at over 50 mana basically at all times as long as you are using your cooldowns correctly in terms of Flame Shield and Teleport. Now over here, I do have 1 point into Flame Shield and Frost Nova. As you can see, I don't have any of the augments for them. If you guys can get to the perfect chess piece and get ranks of defensive skills, you can move these 2 points somewhere else. You can throw like 1 into Elemental Attunement, and then wherever else you see fit, if you want like a little bit more lucky hit chance, a little bit more mana, it's completely up to you what you do with that other point. You could also max out the Ice Armor for like dealing more damage to frozen enemies. That would also be a good one. But right now, I did have to give up on the ranks of defensive so I could get some mana per second. So that's why I currently have these 2 points in here, but that will not be necessary once you get to the perfect gear. Otherwise, you will need points in the teleports. You can get Shimmering Teleport for the DR, also points into Ice Armor, so you can get the increased mana regen while it's active. And like I said, if you can get the ranks of defensive, you can also spec into dealing 15% X to frozen enemies, which is really nice for mobbing. As we move down, we're going to be putting points into Ice Blades. We can get Summoned Ice Blades. You're going to be sending out a ton with this build because we're going to be spamming, and this can end up giving us a ton of cooldowns. You guys are going to be flying through all of your different abilities. Make sure whenever you have an Ice Blades, cast it. Try to get as many out there as possible, because that's also going to turn into more Frozen Orbs that you're sending out on top of all of it. This does have our highest lucky hit chance out of our conjurations, which is really nice. As you can see, Hydra's 3%, Lightning Sphere 6, and our Ice Blades are up to 18. So these are going to be getting a lot of Frozen Orbs for you. Maxing out our defensive skills over here, align the elements, protection, and mana shield. And then we're going to be grabbing Devouring Blaze, throw 1 point into Inner Flames to get there. And then we're going to be maxing out the whole ice tree here with Permafrost, Hoarfrost, Icy Touch, and Frigid Breeze. Finally, for our passive, our key passive, we're going to be using Avalanche. You can mess around with Shatter if you're doing like more mobbing stuff, but like I said, the biggest area where this build slows down or has any trouble whatsoever is bossing. So we are going to be needing to make sure we can get that as much as possible. Shatter's not going to help you on any sort of bossing, so I do like Avalanche. Even though our lucky hit chance on Frozen Orb is not very high, we still get a decent amount with our Ice Blades, and overall, with just how much you're spamming, you can get this activating quite a bit. So I do find that nice to have as opposed to Shatter, but you can swap between the two as you guys see fit. But right now, like I said, this is pretty much what we're going to be running for the skill tree. The big thing in terms of gear that I would change around is get rid of the points in Flame Shield and Frost Nova. You just need the base variants of them. Throw 1 into Elemental Attunement, and then max out your Mystical Ice Armor with the second point. Now for the gear, there's going to be a lot going on here. So let's go over the armor first. So on our helmet, main things you guys are want to be looking for is cooldown reduction, mana per second, and then ideally I would like to have more max life instead of intelligence, but for the most part, this is going to get us going pretty well. Now, if you are going to get the greater affixes on your chest piece and helmet, I do recommend the mana per second. If you can get both of those at 6, you probably will not need to be spamming your Flame Shield and Teleport quite as much with our Tibalt's Will. We do have this just to maintain full mana. It ends up making it much, much more consistent. And as we get to the greater affixes over here, it's going to help us out a lot more and maintain that above 50 for that 12% X in our skill tree. Editing Chadley here. I just wanted to clarify something that you guys may have seen and what I was originally saying in the video, but I cut that part out so I could fill it in with what I actually want to say. So with the Juggernaut aspect here on our gear, this is actually going to give us more armor than we need for the damage reduction cap for it. And that's around like 9,300 armor. And just this one piece is going to be giving us that much. And it's super easy to get 925 gear. So you're going to be way over the armor cap. So you do not need any sort of like percent armor on your gear, any sort of flat armor on any affix if you are running Juggernaut's aspect. That's why I still really do like it. Also, you don't have to like stack up the armor like you do with Disobedience. So it's always active. It's always there. So I still really like it. But if you really do hate that evade cooldown, what you can end up doing is just running percent armor as some like temperaments flat armor on your affixes for your gear. And then you can replace it with like Disobedience. So if you want to go that route, you can. But I still really do like the Juggernaut aspect. All right, I'm going to send you guys back to the normal video. I know the evade cooldown is not that great with our Esu's Heirloom, but the survivability is seriously unmatched, so I do find that very worth it. So that's what I'm running there. And then the second temperament, I do like the lucky hits chance to like freeze, immobilize, things like that, because that's going to be helping out our damage. So right now I do have 2 immobilizes across my chest piece and my gloves, and then 1 freeze up here. Overall, I do find that to be very helpful. And then for the chest piece itself, max life, mana per second, you can do intelligence, anything else there in that third slot, and then more max life. And like I said, the immobilize, this is where we're going to be running the ever living aspect, so we can take that reduced damage from crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Everything's going to be vulnerable, so you're always going to be taking that less damage, which is nice. Then on our gloves, things you really want to be focusing on is obviously ranks of Frozen Orb. I still only have 2 here. My luck on gloves has been insane. I've been spending every single obol on gloves, and I cannot get a better glove than this right now. So ideally, you're going to want the greater affix on Frozen Orb, and then you're going to want crit chance, and then you can either do max life if you want more survivability, but personally, I would really like attack speed. I've been getting more and more attack speed pieces, and I've actually been using an Elixir for attack speed on here because they nerfed quite a bit of the attack speed stuff. So just trying to get as much as I can has really helped out our damage and sustain. So overall, I do really like throwing attack speed into this build. Otherwise, you're going to want damage to distant or cold damage. You're going to only want cold damage until you get one of your Paragon nodes up to the max of 30% X. Ideally, right now, I don't have any cold, and I'm sitting at about like 26, 27% on there, and I don't even have my glyphs max. So you should only need like 1 or 2 of these to be cold damage or so. But just throw on cold damage until you get to that one maxed out, and then from there, go damage to distant. That's going to be our biggest damage affix that we can get to there, and we're going to need as much damage as we possibly can. Once again, immobilize there, and then for our aspect, we're going to be doing Ice Blades. A chance to apply vulnerable is increased, but the main thing is we gain 30% damage against vulnerable enemies. It's definitely a nice bonus. And then for our Pants to Balt's Will, resource gen, and then also the damage on it is really nice. So Flame Shield and Teleport, make sure you are using those properly when you guys are getting down below like half of your mana is going to where you want to pop your Teleport or Flame Shield to get all of that back. And then our boots, Esuv's Heirloom for the crit chance. I've been leveling these up. I did get a pretty decent pair, which is nice. So it's going to really help you guys out in terms of your damage, and also the movement speed is super nice. For our amulet, like I said, Fractured Winter Glass on there. It's really, really good. Our Taller Shahs, it's always a must on our sorcerer. It's a ton of extra damage. You get the resource gen, cooldown, and non-physical damage. Overall, fantastic ring. And then for our normal ring, this is where you're going to want... So I did get this Greater Affix attack speed. This has helped out a ton for me. Otherwise, you're going to want crit chance, maximum life, anything like that. Resource generation. All of those are really good options. Vulnerable damage on there is good. Once again, vulnerable, cold, or distant are probably like my top 3 for your temperaments, and resource gen temperament is really good as well. It's going to help you guys out with your sustain and spamming out as many frozen orbs as possible. For our aspect on here, since we do have the mana regen on our armor here, we can actually get away with not using any sort of like resource aspect. So that's why I just have conceded on this ring. And then for our weapons over here, we can do vulnerable damage, intelligence, max life, crit damage, anything like that is going to be really good. They did take away the attack speed, so that's why we can't have that on there anymore. And then for our temperaments, we're going to have, you don't want crowd control. It's not going to help out your bossing. So once again, distant, vulnerable, and cold. And then the big one, these are the must on your on your weapon and your offhand, is going to be chance for Frozen Orb projectiles to cast twice. You're definitely going to want that on both. Make sure that's the priority. And then once you get those, then you can go for the damage options. And then on the weapons is where I put the Frozen Orb explodes twice for the percentage of its damage. And then on the focus is where I'm running Storm Swell, so you deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. So just make sure you are using your cooldowns effectively so you can maintain a barrier at all times, your ice armor. Just try to keep that barrier up at all times. It can help out your survivability and damage at the same time. In terms of your affixes on here, crit chance, resource cost reduction, max life, cooldown, anything like that is going to be good to go. And then once again, make sure you get that Frozen Orb cast twice, and then you can go for damage, cold damage, vulnerable, anything like that I've said before. But overall, that's what I've been running for my gear. It's been working pretty well. There's definitely some upgrades I could get, especially in the glove department, but this has been working pretty well so far, even without perfect gear. So earlier I did mention that I've been using an elixir, and that is the Elixir of Advantage 2. You're going to be getting these like crazy. So that's why I don't really have a problem incorporating elixirs into a build here. So this increases your attack speed by 15% and your lucky hit by 15%. The lucky hit isn't that great. It is a little bit helpful, but the big thing is definitely the attack speed. That has been super nice for just spamming. Otherwise, some other things that you could run would be like crit chance or the elixir of resourcefulness too. 20% resource cost reduction and 25 maximum resource. So if you guys don't have the mana per second here on your gear yet, you can run this for the time being, but then once you get to these, you can then swap over to the Elixir of Advantage, because you should always have one of these active at all times, considering how often they are dropping. Now for our Paragon board, we were able to fit in 6 glyphs here and a couple legendary nodes. So starting off with our starter board, I do grab the non-physical and some of the like resistance, max life things here on this side. The max life is really good, and I needed a little bit more resistance, so I'm going into there. If you have a lot of resistance, you can get rid of like things like this. You can get rid of these, but currently with my gear setup, I do have a little bit of resistance to all element to fill in the gaps. Otherwise, go up the left here and grab more non-physical, and then here is where I'm throwing exploits. None of these are maxed yet. They're all like level 15 for the most part. I just got to their area expansions, and that's about it so far. But as we move up, we're going to be going into the Enchant Master board first. This way we can get more non-physical and make sure we get the bonuses to them. Because all this non-physical is going to play into our Frigid Fate bonus over here. So this is going to go up to 30%. So this is where I was saying it is really nice to have a little bit of cold damage on your gear. I currently don't have that as any of my temperaments, but that can fill out to the last 4% here that I need. But that's why we are going for the non-physical, because that's going to be cold damage, and then go up in our Frigid Fates. But for the actual glyph here in the Enchant Master tree, this is where I throw Elementalists. It's going to allow us to get 15% extra damage, which is really good, and it's going to boost our non-physical nodes here, and our resistance to all elements over here, which is really nice. And then from here, you're going to be going to the right, and this is where we grab our Frigid Fate board. This is going to be our third board. For its glyph, we're going to be grabbing Flame Feeder for the 10% X direct damage to burning enemies. We're making everything burn, so that's a ton of extra damage for us. And then obviously grabbing the Frigid Fate. Now from here is where we're going to move up and go into the Icefall board. This way we can deal 15% more with our frost skills to vulnerable enemies, and it's going to double if they're frozen. So that's why it is nice to have that like lucky hit chance to freeze and have our Frost Nova on our actual tree or skill bar, so we can get to the freeze on some elites and stuff like that. But then for the glyph in here is we're going to be grabbing Destruction for the extra crit damage. I take a little weird route up here just so I can get to all the dexterity. Ends up working pretty nice, and we get a little bit more damage reduction from chilled enemies. It's not going to work on bosses, but it is nice for the general mobs. And then we're going to come back over here to the left and go up the top of our Enchant Master board, and then grab the Static Surge board because we can get a little bit of extra mana. I find this to be pretty helpful. Also, we're going to be stunning a lot with our lightning spears that are coming out, so it is nice to have a little bit of extra damage to stun in there. For this glyph, we're going to be grabbing Control. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of like damage to CC because it doesn't work too great on bosses, but we are going to be knocking down bosses quite a bit with this build, which is really nice. So this does come into play for like burst damage on the bosses, and it's still really good for general mobbing, and there's not really a ton of other great glyphs that we could replace this with. So I do really like having the Control glyph in here right now. So we're just grabbing some dexterity and things like that so we can fill out the extra bonus from it. And then finally, we're going to be going down at the bottom of our Frigid Fate. So this is where I move down here, and we're going to be grabbing the Searing Heat board. This way we can just get right into the glyph over here. That's all we care about in here. We can just grab the glyph, and I run Tactician in here for the 10% X after using a defensive skill. You're going to be using these all the time, so that's pretty much always going to be active. Just grab the dex in the side areas over here. I did grab a little bit of fire resistance to fill out that over there because I was a little bit short, so that helped me out a little bit there. Otherwise, in our Frigid Fate board, you guys can be grabbing the oppressive nodes here for more vulnerable damage and DR from vulnerable. Same thing up here with guarded for more DR from vulnerable. So just to recap our boards, in the starting board, you're going to go up into Enchant Master, then into Frigid Fate, up to Icefall. Then we're going to go back over and grab Static Surge out the top of our Enchant Master. And then finally, we're going to be grabbing Searing Heat out to the bottom of our Frigid Fate board. So that should be your order so you can get all of the different bonuses. I'm a little bit short on like one or two of the bonuses over here. See, I'm like less than 30 willpower away over here. So I could probably fill that in some other areas, maybe change a couple nodes around and grab a little bit more willpower if there's like a choice I could be having. But for the most part, this board has been working pretty well for me, so definitely give it a go. Overall, I think Frozen Orb feels really good. Really, the only downside is the bossing, and that's only really when you compare it to like some of the really top-end options in the game, like Necro, Minion Necro type things. But everything else feels really good. You can just fly through any sort of nightmare dungeons or pits. Even as you start moving up into the like 50s and 60s, it still feels really fast, still feels really good, and it overall just kind of nukes everything. It's pretty much a wide screen area nuke, just because all of the frozen orbs will be just kind of going directly towards all the different enemies, especially since we're casting so many with the enchantment and the extra effects on our weapons. It ends up being really, really good clear and pretty darn decent damage on top of it. I'm going to be trying to mess around with some different options here on Sorcerer that isn't Blizzard for trying to get some more boss damage. I am pretty tired of running Blizzard because that always ends up just being the best option since the start of the game, with the exception of Bugged Ball Lightning that one season. But we're going to be messing around with some different things over on stream later this week, so if you guys want to head on over there, hopefully I'll see you on Twitch. Otherwise, if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you leave a thumbs up on it to let me know. Also consider subscribing for more Diablo 4 content here on the channel. We're going to have a bunch of builds on the way very shortly. But thank you all for watching this far in the video. I really do appreciate it. Hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. See ya.